and welcome everyone to the latest in our special Diamond Ambassador sessions devoted to trying to provide as good a service as we can to our Diamond Ambassadors during this strange time. We're really glad to see you all, and especially to welcome Jake Berry, obviously our local MP from Rossendale and Darwen. Jake became the Member of Parliament for Rossendale and Darwen in 2010, and as we all well know, has served as a Minister for the Northern Powerhouse and Local Growth at MHCLG, and now chairs the Northern Research Group for lobbies for greater investment in the North, which I'm sure we're all on board with. Jake, would you like to kick off with your view of how you see things at the moment and what you feel are the important things government should be doing and you're pushing them to do? Would be really glad to hear. Thank you.
Thank you, Miranda. And first of all, thank you so much for having me at the East Lancashire Chamber and your Diamond Ambassador event. I mean, I know you want to hear from politicians, but it's not as we make things happen, of course. It's all of you. So thank you for all the work you are doing, trading us through this appalling time that we find ourselves in. I left government actually just over a year ago on the 16th of February. My last position was as a cabinet member for the Northern Powerhouse. And in that time, I sort of got the opportunity to see a rigged system. Now, that's quite a bold statement, sort of language that Donald Trump would have used. I don't claim to be a Trump fan, but it's absolutely true that we live in a country that is one of the most centralized countries, not just in Europe, but in the world, but also one where the problems and the requirements of London business trump many areas of the North. So when I left government, I didn't decide that that was going to be the end of what I wanted to do, which is tackle that huge inequality that we see between the North and South, but I decided I could do it in a different way. So after a period of the pandemic, when we started to be released in July, I went back to Parliament and herded together, in a very gentle way, the Northern Conservative politicians and said, if, like me, you believe that in fact you don't work for the government, you work for the people who elected you, you very happily and proudly support Boris Johnson and his government, then now is the time for us to come together. In the 2019 election, just over 80 Conservative MPs were elected in the North of England. That is the most for nearly 100 years. And by working together collectively, we can use our muscle and our collective sort of knowledge to make sure we get a better deal for the North of England. And that, if you like, was the kernel of the idea that formed the Northern Research Group. And since we formed, that's exactly what we've done. We have come together, we have lobbied. The first thing we engaged on very actively was seeking a route out of lockdown for the North of England. If you look at the statistics, this appalling COVID pandemic has more deeply affected the North of England than any other part of the country. If you live in the North, you are more likely to both catch and die from COVID-19. Businesses have been stuck in some form of restrictions for almost a year now, with a few weeks off for good behaviour in those heady days of July and August. And clearly the government needs a Northern Economic Recovery Plan which actively reflects the fact that our experience of COVID has been different than areas like Cornwall and even London. We forget, of course, that London was going into Christmas in tier 2 with pubs still open and people still able to mix and meet. So that's the first thing we did, was press the government on that, and I think we're making progress on that. And I think the Levelling Up Fund, which was announced by the Chancellor, was directly negotiated and led from the activities of the Northern Research Group, and I think we'll come on to that in questions. And then also what we've done, because it's all very easy to identify the problems of the North of England, we're also actively seeking solutions. And in doing that, we are working with businesses, with policy groups and with think tanks to find a way to unlock the potential of the North. And it's not all about, just excuse me one moment. So it's not all about, obviously, the problems that we have in the North, it's about the solutions as well. And I hope those of you, including Martin Lewis, who I know has read it from the Beta Group, those of you who read our national newspapers have seen the Big Bang document that we brought out jointly with the Centre for Policy Studies last week. And that's really, I suppose, where we are going to now. Yes, we need a Northern Economic Recovery Plan. But we need that recovery plan, frankly, not to be government as usual. I can tell you, as someone who's been at the heart of the government, was a minister for 3 years, that government is incremental. They do not like revolutionary changes. They do not like a spirit of restlessness that is fermenting across the north, reflected by Northern MPs. And I think our job now is to say, actually, if we are serious about levelling up, if we're serious about supporting people and businesses and communities across the north of England, frankly, we need a big change. And of course, the moniker of this government, and also the moniker of Joe Biden, is to build back better. I use a slightly different one. I want to build back different. I don't want to return to a point as we were as we entered into this pandemic, when your postcode dictated your life outcome more than your personal ability and talent. I want every person across the north of England, whether you're born in Bacup or whether you're born in Buckinghamshire, to have the opportunity to reach your full potential. And I'll end with two things. First of all, just talk about the power of the Northern Research Group. I'm an active backbencher. I was in number 10 yesterday, meeting a gaggle of the Prime Minister's most senior advisors to go through the Big Bang document with them, not quite setting out demands, but talking to them about what our hopes and expectations are as Northern MPs. That was a think tank's report. Now, I can tell you that think tanks are normally about as useful as a chocolate fireguard. They put out pieces there, very interesting pieces about things that are never going to happen. I like to think that the involvement of the Northern Research Group turns it into a do tank, because not only can we come up with the ideas, but we also collectively have the power to heavily influence, and in maybe some cases compel government to listen to what we're saying. So I hope it's something, as business leaders across East Lancashire and more widely business leaders across the north will understand that we are there to support you. We work for you and we are there to support you. And the final thing is just on this appalling COVID pandemic. I mean, it has been horrendous. I think many of us forget that a city the size of Durham has died because of this disease. I mean, I know it's been spread out over many months, but if you put it in that context, it's been like losing everyone who lives in Durham. It is truly, the tragedy is just horrendous. But we have to move beyond that. And the Prime Minister on the 22nd of February is going to set out a plan to release Britain and Britain's economy. And the argument I am making, and I think we collectively need to make as people who represent businesses and represent the politics of the north of England, is that as we build back different, it is the north of England that is in the prime position to drive that recovery. And as we bounced back in August, we saw things like the PMR showed that the recovery in the north of England was faster and more robust than it was in any other part of the country. And why was that? Well, I'm not an economist, but I'll tell you why I think it is. It is because our economy is dominated by the real economy, Beta Group, cardboard box company, other people who manufacture and make things here in the north of England, as well as brilliant service providers. But we in a way that the south isn't, have a good real economy, manufacturing and engineering. And as Britain recovers, we have learned during this crisis that people don't need, they'd like to have their haircut. They don't need to go to restaurants, although of course we'd all love to do so with friends and family. But people do need the sort of things that we are making. And that shows that if the government supports what we are good at in a very active, revolutionary and robust way, then come rain, come shine, come COVID, come anything else that the world throws at us, the north of England will be resilient and will succeed in times when we may not be able to rely on things like the City of London. So that is why I'm extremely hopeful for the recovery. I think it will be led out of the north. I think our economy is entering a different period anyway. We talk about this idea of global Britain. The best way to deliver global Britain is to deliver a global north first. So I hope those introductory remarks, I want to keep them relatively brief, I've already probably gone on a bit too long, will stimulate some debate amongst our guests today. Thank you.
Thank you, Jake. I agree, especially with what you've said about the difference we've seen in terms of the recovery from the financial impact. And if you look at our Lancashire results from our quarterly economic survey for the last quarter of 2020, you will see a stark difference in terms of the feeling within the recruitment, the increase in turnover, the increase in profitability of our manufacturing sector versus our service sector. And those manufacturing sector companies are predicting all of those things doing this, despite things holding them back. And that really has been a huge economic support locally. I'd like to ask our first question on behalf of Tony Grimshaw from Whatmore. Tony isn't here because he's actually recording with Sky News now about what businesses in Lancashire actually need from the budget. And that, in a way, is part of Tony's question. Tony asks, the government has said one of its primary aims is to level up the country, to close the north-south divide, notwithstanding the fact that the COVID-19 situation must take priority. Can the Minister update us on how the government are going to level up the country? So I know you've already started to talk about that with us. Perhaps you could give us some insight on what you think will be in the plans, but also what you think should be in the plans going forward from the budget and beyond.
Well, my own personal view is that we will see a very limited budget in terms of things that it changes, and I think that is the correct approach. I think we need a steady as she goes budget without huge change. I don't think now is the right time to push change on business or individuals in terms of taxation and the way we do things. In truth, no economic prediction made by the Office of Budget Responsibility at the moment is going to bear scrutiny in 6 months' time, because we simply can't say where we will be. So I hope and believe we will have what I would call a business certainty budget, one that looks to extend some or all of the current supports that are in place. If I were a betting man, I would say that I think it's relatively likely that the government will extend some form of relief around business rates. I think it's relatively likely that furlough will either continue or be subject to a taper rather than having a hard stop date in April. I think it's likely, not even relatively likely, I think it's likely that the differential VAT rate applied to tourism and leisure will continue. And I think it's less likely, but I wouldn't be surprised to see some sort of relief around repayment of CBILS and bounce back loans. Because in truth, the government is aware, and the Northern Research Group has spoken to Treasury about this, that if you immediately start racking up people's business rates, shoving the VAT up, demanding your CBILS money back, your bounce back money back, and all the other things we've discussed, that lots of businesses won't be able to do that straight away. Many of them, unfortunately, in that sort of situation would cease to trade. And that means that all the money we have spent so far keeping those businesses going and keeping those people employed has been wasted. We may as well have not bothered in the first place and not run up this huge deficit. So it seems to me, and that would have been the wrong thing to do, of course, but it seems to me extremely unlikely that there won't be a business certainty, steady as she goes budget. In terms of tax changes, I simply can't say. I read very widely that there may be a change in capital gains tax. That is, of course, of primary interest to business holders. Many of you will be more interested in entrepreneurs' relief as owners and runners of businesses. I don't know whether that will change. That seems the least likely thing to change, although I do think there may be a change in capital gains tax. But of course, that is regarded by many as a tax that they don't pay. It tends to be business owners and people in senior management roles who pay capital gains tax rather than people who work in businesses. But I know that the government also understands and realises that if they make you pay more capital gains tax, you are just more likely to employ fewer people and not invest in your business because you've had to hand more money over to the Treasury. So I don't know whether they'll do that. It seems that they may. I think there'll be a proper budget at the tail end of this year, October, November, and I think that will set the fiscal direction for the rest of this Parliament. I personally subscribe to the view, and it is just a view, that significant tax increases are pretty unlikely. Of course, we do have to pay for COVID, but the best way of doing that is to have a low tax, low regulation economy that actually grows UK PLC's GDP, rather than just taxing what we have already, which normally sends it into reverse. And that's certainly what the Northern Research Group is lobbying for. In terms of the wider changes we would like to see as a group in the slightly longer term, for the research we've done, I don't think it's unreasonable to say that we have a planning system that isn't fit for purpose for businesses. We've of course recently called for the expansion of things like permitted development to enable existing businesses to expand their premises by, in residential terms, 25%, without the need, the delay and the cost of a planning application. I don't know whether the government will accept that. It seems a pretty reasonable thing to me. And also we are calling for more speed in terms of decision making. I use the example of West Cumbria mining up on the west coast of Cumbria, which is a coking mine that will go a mile out to sea. They have been waiting for their planning for 5 years. Now, we could have a debate for the rest of the day about whether they should get that planning or not in terms of environmental concerns. But the real thing that will make West Cumbria mining fail is the delay. You cannot keep drilling machines, and there's cost to capital obviously in terms of the capex on that project. So whether it's going to happen or not really needs to be determined quickly, and that's why we as a group have called for larger businesses, those employing over 100 people, to have the opportunity to gain planning permission in 2 months. We're not calling for any short circuit of the current planning regulations whatsoever. We're not calling for people to be able to build in the green belt. We are just saying that what businesses need is speed of decision, not preferential treatment in terms of that consideration of that decision. They shouldn't be able to, for example, ignore environmental concerns and things like that. And then the final thing is, I'm sort of semi-hopeful that this is something the government is interested in. There is now a growing call to look at full expensing for businesses in terms of capital expenditure. Now that is very, very expensive, and I don't think we'll get there. But there's an acknowledgement now in government that in about 2012, I think from memory, someone will correct me, capital allowances were cut in exchange for a cut in corporation tax to fund a corporation tax. Now, of course, that massively favours the service sector, who have very limited capex on their business, but directly impacts manufacturing businesses. And if we want a real economy-led recovery here in the north of England, we need to do something to redress that balance. So I don't think we are going to get full expensing, but I do hope probably at the end of this year rather than on March, early March, first week of March, I do think that we will hopefully see some good news around capital allowances and capex on businesses, because there's £700 billion currently held on corporate balance sheets in the United Kingdom. And if we can find a way to release that into business investment, level up the productivity of the businesses across the north, not just level up communities, then I think we would, we would see a return to a growing economy very quickly.
Thank you very much. That's a really interesting insight in terms of some of the nuances that we probably haven't heard in the press about what might be coming, and also a better understanding of the arguments you're putting. And I think we'd agree with them. I want last question in advance from me is one on behalf of some of our members from the hospitality, tourism and leisure sector. On behalf of Andy Brown from Cowood Leisure and also Keely Beaumont from the Fence Gate. Andy's unable to join us at the moment. He was due to be here. I'm sorry that I'm asking it on his behalf, but he would say we've had to take a £1.4 million CBILS loan, which we have to start repaying shortly in June, and our rates are payable on the 1st of April at £40,000 a month. We're losing £250,000 per month, and we've only had £50,000 grants. What support is likely to come to help the sector where they're literally accruing a massive amount of debts? And Keely wants to, looking forward, saying we're hearing restrictions now, all the way through in terms of events for later on in 2021. It's imperative that government scraps business rates for the further 12 months, and until we can go back to maximum capacity numbers, because otherwise we really don't see how we can take the sector back into profitability. I know it's a huge task to try and talk about what we can do, but what's your take on what should be done and could be done?
Well, I mean, collectively and corporately, the Northern Research Group has called for the business rate exemption to be extended for 12 months and the VAT reduction for the tourism, hospitality and leisure industries to be extended. That's what we believe needs to happen. I've said I don't think we're going to have a hard stop on business rates in April. It would seem to me to be, the sort of, the sort of economics of the bedlam to push all the, say, well, hey, right, okay, we're almost through this. By the way, please send us a check for, £3,000 a month for your business rates. It just would seem completely bizarre. I can't really say, except, let's see what the budget holds. I think it's extremely unlikely that there will be a hard stop in April. I hope the Chancellor is listening, but Northern members of Parliament and I, as a local member here in East Lancashire, I see many businesses from my own area, will keep pushing that agenda. It's absolutely clear tourism and hospitality has been hit harder than many other sectors, although every sector has been hit. And then what I'd say in the longer term is it seems to me that business rates is an unsustainable tax. It's loved by the revenue and treasuries because it's really easy to attach taxation to buildings because you can't move them. In the way Amazon is set up for taxation is most of its profit goes out the country in a royalty payment. That's very hard to tax because it's going to another tax domicile. Buildings you can't shift, but it does seem to me that we need to fundamentally review the business rates regime in terms of the new and digital economy. And the way I would personally do that, and this isn't a policy of the Northern Research Group or the government, the way I would personally do that is look at some way, an online sales tax, an online trading tax, to try and capture some of the value of the digital economy, not to favour any type of business that's still in bricks and mortar, but simply to level the playing field, because at the moment the playing field is tilted massively in favour of digital businesses. While we welcome the huge value they bring to our economy, that can't be at the expense of traditional bricks and mortar retailers and manufacturing, warehousing and other types of business.
Yeah, it's a really hard situation to see how we can support those businesses going forward in terms of the amount of debt that they're going to come out of the sector, the situation with, let alone the support to carry on helping them unlock. That's the problem they're going to be faced with. So in terms of our questions in advance, I'm now going to come to Mike Lane and then to Martin Lewis, and then I'll start to work through the ones you've been lodging in the chat, just so you know that we are paying attention to those. So Mike Lane from We Buy Books, you were really looking at how we can unlock some of our real resource locally by changing the planning system to help.
Yeah, Jake's already addressed this in a partial way, but my question is, as I submitted it, the North suffers from an undersupply of modern, affordable, industrial and commercial property. At the same time, the North suffers from an oversupply of old, run-down, dilapidated industrial stock suitable for industries of a bygone age, but not fit for purpose for modern-day industry. Many of these buildings are listed, and you only need to drive around any of the northern towns. I drove through Nelson and Burnley the other week to see hundreds of such examples of run-down, uncared for industrial stock. Practically all land development sites have been given over to sorely needed housing development, so there's none available for industry. And we've all heard it said that one of the reasons Germany did so well post-war was the RAF and the US Air Force did a better job than the Germans did about bombing the industry. I've lost my place. In the UK, planning restrictions and listed building status have been conveyed on buildings that don't really need it, and mean that we're not clearing out the old and redundant and making way for the new. Insuring these old buildings, now I've just bought one, is costing us almost as much as the mortgage. It's enormous costs. And making changes to these buildings is a very slow and laborious process, requiring various consents, etc. And it's this many weeks for that stage, this many weeks for this stage. We want to move at a faster pace than all that. So my question to Jake would the Northern Research Group of MPs take a look at this problem and see if there are ways through the changes in planning or grants for improvement, for demolition, to clear up would help provide the industrial and commercial infrastructure fit for an industrial powerhouse. I'd just like to add 2 extra things on. I Googled this morning about old mills in Lancashire, and up the front article was somewhere in the Lancashire Telegraph that was a list of all the old mills used last year as weed factories. And you go down it, there are about 10 of them, one just down the road here. So that's someone's found a use for them, but I'm not sure the sort of use the government had in mind. And the other point is that in reinvesting we've done quite well. We're an online business. I'll talk to Jake another day about online sales taxes, because they'll just get passed to the consumer. But in making investment in an old mill, the government's gained enormously in stamp duty, about £100,000 tax. Is that a good use, and is that a good incentive for people to invest?
Thanks, Mike.
Thanks, Mike. Look, so this is something the Northern Research Group has initially turned our attention to slightly. And the first thing we talked about is, in order for Project Speed, as the Prime Minister calls it, to be delivered on, we need a faster planning system. That's what our initial focus is on. Mike's question is much broader than that, and I'm just going to touch on some of it, but really happy to come and get my next sort of chunk of reading material from you in the next week or so, Mike. For a socially distanced meeting, but it's a brilliant business, and Mike should be congratulated as a online visionary here in East Lancashire. First of all, Mike, I just can't resist it. So just touching on your online sales tax, yes, I would just gently point out that business rates are also passed on to the consumer by other businesses that pay them and aren't necessarily in the retail space. I know your business is a hugely space hungry business, so you would actually be hammered twice, but we need to find a way through. And my own view is by the sort of the balancing sales scales of an online sales tax should be reducing business rates for all, including yourself. But on the planning issue, I talk about some of the challenges as I see them. Small borough councils, Accrington, Rosendale, Burnley, Hyndburn, Ribble Valley, the people who work in their planning departments, they are not bad people. They are hugely committed public servants doing the best that they can. They simply do not have the depth and the capacity to process planning applications quickly. And that's why I'm such a big believer in amalgamating local councils here in East Lancashire, or in the alternative, just simply getting our existing councils, and it's one of the things our report called for, to pass up planning and responsibilities to planning either to a collaborative and cooperative body that represents more, which could have sort of 10 times more people working there, or to higher tier authorities. I think that would give better speed of decision making and probably ultimately better decisions. I always think about it. When I was a solicitor, I used to work in a firm called Halliwell's. Many of you may have heard of it. We had a guy called Andrew Peart, who's a very fine planning lawyer, and his specialism was applying for for supermarkets. He would do one a month, and so he was doing 12 a year. He was one of the best sort of people in the UK. When he went to a local council, they may have not dealt with the major application for a supermarket for well over a decade. So, we need bigger planning departments that work over a larger area, because even the people who work, they get a better breadth and depth of experience and are better able to make rapid decisions, or are not slightly overwhelmed in some cases by having a big application like the application for the Aldi in Bacup. Will be the first time Rosendale Council has dealt with an application for a major supermarket for a considerable number of years. So that's the first thing. I think we've got to scale up planning departments to be light on their feet. I think we also need to look at giving some freedom to businesses to have things like permitted development, to take away the need for planning at all for moderate to medium size expansion of businesses. In terms of our derelict mills, I think one of the biggest causes of this is vacant rates on commercial properties. Landlords, they don't like owning empty properties. They buy these properties to rent them out, to have tenants in there, to make money. And I think if you clobber landlords with vacant rates, there's no incentive for them to invest in those properties, because the money they would have been spending doing them up, they are spending paying a tax to the government, and it leads to the decline of these properties. And I guess on the listing and the sort of these properties sitting there vacant, I mean, one of the best things we can do is create a growing economy of new and vibrant businesses, because of course the mill you have just purchased, Mike, probably would have sat empty for a decade and become one of these, you know, poor buildings which are empty and without people loving them and looking after them, if we didn't have We Buy Books, an expanding, hugely successful and exciting business in the Rosendale Valley, to go and pop themselves in there. So you know, we need to make sure that we have a growing economy, and that landlords who own these buildings can either rent them or sell them to tenants with access to capital who are going to improve them. And on the listing, you know, that does need to be much more flexible. I've dealt with businesses in Rosendale who've bought very ordinary buildings, not your building necessarily, but very ordinary buildings, and the council seem to have decided that you know, it's the same architectural value and quality of Westminster Abbey. They do need to be much more pragmatic, and an old, you know, architecturally sort of important building that is falling down is really of no value, because of course all of that heritage is at risk. It's much better to be flexible and say, well, let's preserve what we can of that heritage, but ensure this building has a vibrant and viable future as a home for a new growing business in Lancashire. I hope that answers some of your questions.
Just a couple of comeback points. Number one, quite a lot of the mills with all the floors they have they're not suitable for businesses, modern businesses. You need forklift trucks to move stuff around. We're fortunate, and what we do, it sort of works for us, but 95% of businesses, it just wouldn't. So I'll leave it at that, because there's lots of other people wanting to talk. So thank you very much, Jake.
Thank you very much. Perhaps also we bring Jake quite quickly to the Rosendale Business Leaders Group again. And that will give us, if you wish, Jake, that will give us some chance to explore with the local businesses in your area some of these questions coming through too in advance of the budget. One more of my questions that have been pre-asked. I want to come to Martin Lewis, again looking at how the large-scale national commitment comes down to local investment. Martin.
Yes. Hello, everybody. Hello, Jake. Well done for the Big Bang initiative. Anything that gets investment in the north and not in the south is a good idea, but good luck with it. I think you're batting uphill, but there you go. But in Rosendale, I feel so far away from any initiative like that. Not only do we seem last to be looked at in Lancashire, you know, then Lancashire's last to be looked at in the north. And you get the likes of the he who shouts the loudest, like your Andy Burnhams and stuff like that. They always seem to attract more investment. How is this investment going to be targeted to the local Rosendale Valley?
Well, thanks, Martin. I mean, the first thing to say is the only place I know where you can bat uphill is Edenfield Cricket Ground. So I've had a bit of I've had the odd bit of practice when I've been there. Well, as we set out in the report, there's clearly a spirit of revolution and restlessness. Did you all hear my joke about Edenfield Cricket Club? Okay, right. That was the important bit. There's clearly a growing feeling of restlessness across the north, replicated in the 2016 Brexit referendum, the 2019 general election, and the government needs to recognise that. Otherwise, frankly, it's going to be in quite a lot of trouble, and all parties need to recognise it: Labour, Conservative, and Liberal Democrats, and others. And it needs to respond. And a good way of responding is for the government to do what its job is to use the fiscal levers in terms of taxation and regulation to free up the North's economy to grow. And we've called for that in our report, both in terms of capital allowances, deregulation, etc., etc. That's the first thing. Secondly, in terms of Lancashire's voice being heard, you're absolutely right. I've long believed that we need a mayor for East Lancashire, and I know that you had Henry Murison of the Northern Powerhouse Partners, not talking to you, but did a speech yesterday calling for a Lancashire mayor to Lancashire businesses. We need both local government reorganisation because the two-tier system of local government, county council and small borough councils, isn't really fit for purpose for the modern day. And then we need an Andy Burnham type character, preferably not Andy Burnham, but an Andy Burnham type character banging the drum for Lancashire. And the reason this is so important is if we look at the government's Levelling Up Fund, it is £4 billion. That equates to £7 million per constituency, which, you know, frankly, we could invest £7 million in Rosendale, but it really wouldn't be enough, and we need to be much more ambitious than that. But also, if you look at the quantum of that fund, which is, you know, welcome, but supposed to be the sort of the fix-all for this levelling up agenda, it is less than the European structural funds and the growth funds that were invested in the last 5 years. And while we saw some change, we didn't see the speed of change and the scale of change that we all want to see. So the best way of driving our economy is to get both national and international investment driven by the private sector. This has been done with great success in Manchester, which has attracted £6 billion to that city alone. That compares very favourably with £4 billion for the rest of the country. But in order to get that, we need institutions that are at a scale that can interact with the likes of Abu Dhabi sovereign wealth funds, the Chinese government, the Singaporean government. Frankly, Rosendale Borough Council or Hindburn Council isn't an institution that at a scale that could interact with sovereign wealth funds and major investors. So I do think, while I don't necessarily welcome an additional layer of government in a mayor, but I do think having that individual, whoever he or she may be, who could go out and say, we're going to put together a basket of investments for you in Lancashire, which may represent, say, £2 billion, and that will be an investment in Preston, an investment in the Rosendale Valley, an investment in Chorley. Because when talking to these investors, and I've did quite a lot of it in my last role, they are not interested in investing in 1 mil in Rosendale. They want a scale investment. They want to make one decision that sees £1 billion leave their wealth fund. Now, clearly we welcome that, but Rosendale isn't at a scale that could have £1 billion invested in, you know, one area, nor is Blackburn with Darwin, nor is Hindburn. So having that powerful individual who can advocate for us, I think would be the thing that would, over the medium term, transform our economy, and it's something I'm very keen on. It doesn't have universal support across Conservative MPs in Lancashire. It doesn't have universal support across Labour MPs in Lancashire. Not everyone agrees with it. Not every council is in favour of it, but I am a big believer in it. And if you believe in it too, it's the responsibility of business to try and move politicians away from self-interest and move them towards the wider picture. And I'll say one final thing. I don't believe, if you look at the electoral maths, a mayor in Lancashire would be a Conservative. I think it would be a Labour mayor. That said, even if it would be a political opponent of mine, I still think we should absolutely have it for Lancashire.
Thank you.
Thank you, Jake. I think you're off the mark with a boundary there. I've no further questions.
Thank you, Martin. I think especially with the fact that we're now looking simultaneously at a change in the chair for the LEP and a change in the leader for the county council, it makes it all the more obvious we really do need to have a single voice for widespread investment across the whole of Lancashire, so government can really hear what we're saying. And I think it's a tragedy that we find ourselves behind in Manchester and Liverpool in the queue because we look disorganised and they can't hear what we're saying. It's appalling.
We actually have a larger economy than Liverpool.
Yeah, absolutely. And a more resilient economy than both of them at this moment. Anyway, that is under debate, possibly for another day, and we could come back to it quite easily. I'm going to keep on working through the questions in the order that you've asked them, everyone, so you know where we're at. And in a moment, I'll come to Melissa about R&D and locking capital investments, and also where do we see the future funding for things like the AMRC. But firstly, let me come to Fazal Dad from Blackburn College about the Skills White Paper.
Hi, good morning, colleagues. Jake, I'd welcome your thoughts. As you're aware, the Secretary of State for Education, Gavin Williamson, released the Department of Education paper, Skills for Jobs, Lifelong Learning for Opportunity for Growth. Clearly, there's lots of articles within it. There's 5, what I'm calling pillars within the document. But one bit that I would really welcome your thoughts. It talks about, obviously, the Strategic Development Fund and allowing colleges to have business centres. What's your take on how that would fit in with what already exists, Jake?
Thanks, Faisal. I mean, the first thing to say is it's a white paper, and all colleges in the country will have the opportunity to input their views. I'm not an expert in this, but it just happens that you are. So I really hope that you will be ensuring that your voice is heard. More widely, I do support the idea of creating stronger links between HE and FE and other sources of education in the business community, because as you go around businesses in Rosendale and Darwen and East Lancashire more widely as a constituency member of Parliament, many of them will say one of the greatest challenges facing them is skills, and we need to ensure that young people and older people who are upskilling during their life leave those educational institutions with a meaningful menu of skills that businesses want to choose from. And I think anything that we've got great relations between business and education. I'm not doing any of those down, but I think we can always go better. And I think the second point I'd make is just on the levelling up agenda. If we could level up productivity, and there are 2 great ways of doing that. One is CapEx, frankly, in business and machinery, but also investing in your people, particularly in the skills space, levels of productivity. If we could level up productivity in the north of England to similar levels as we see in some of the more productive areas, I think the most productive in the country is the city of Bath, but I think if you take London and the southeast, then it would massively lift our economy and see us catching up very rapidly with other areas of the country. And levelling up is not about dragging any other area down. We don't want to see people in London get poorer. We want to see us get richer. And the 2 things are not mutually exclusive, both culturally richer, financially richer, and have a better and stronger business community. So I do think that the paper is a welcome acknowledgement by the government that you don't just drive the economy by putting more bricks and mortar out there, but by investing in people. And I think that as this goes through Parliament and experts like you contribute to it, we need to make sure that this has people and business front and centre of the ambition.
Okay, thank you, Jake.
Very much, thank you. In a moment, I'll come to Stephen Greenhouse from JGO, but first, could I invite Melissa Conlon from the AMRC to ask her questions, please?
Thank you very much, Miranda. Yeah, the AMRC Northwest, we're currently here on the ground. We've assisted over 130 Lancashire SMEs to adopt Industry 4 technologies. Just wondering, we're doing this on ERDF funding. So first question really is, what approach do you think the government's going to take in terms of ensuring these types of programs exist going forward? And how can we influence this? And also, I noticed in the CPS study, it doesn't really mention research and development. So where do you actually see the role of R&D in relation to actually unlocking some of this private capital investment, and encouraging sort of future business investment? Miranda and I sort of talk about this quite a lot and got a few ideas, but just wondering sort of where you see that.
Okay. So first of all, in terms of your funding, it's a bit of a racing certainty, I would say, that will be replicated through something called the Shared Prosperity Fund, which is going to be the follow-on fund replacing lots of things that were previously done by the European Union. People, of course, talk about them being done by the European Union. It was still, in fact, British taxpayers' money. So I think it's it would frankly beg a belief if the government didn't continue with funding their British taxpayer didn't continue with funding their MRC because of the awesome work you do. And I've seen firsthand, both as a constituency MP and as my previous role as Northern Powerhouse Minister, what a huge difference you're making to industry in terms of global competitiveness here in the north of England. So I hope you can, although you may not just have the certainty yet of that, I hope you can sleep sound knowing that it will continue. That CPS report is the first of a series that we're doing with various think tanks. And the next one I can exclusively reveal to you will be the Centre for Progressive Policy Studies, where we're doing one about social infrastructure across the north of England. And then we'll probably return to the CPS thereafter for another corporate one, particularly focusing on R&D. There's not much the government can do, in truth, about corporate R&D spend. That goes where it feels it can be best served. But we can definitely do something about government R&D spend, which you won't be surprised to note, and it's been well written about in in newspapers and academic journals. The vast majority, the 80 or 90% of which goes into Oxford, Cambridge, and that golden triangle. If we're serious about levelling up, we need to level up our academic institutions and our R&D spending in other areas outside that golden triangle. And I hope it's something that you will start to see the government making some interesting announcements on within the next month.
Okay, great. Because I mean, what we're doing are very much mini R&D projects. So whilst all these large and these very mini R&D projects are the things that are making the difference to, our manufacturers on the ground here in Lancashire.
Yeah.
Thank you.
Thank you very much. Dharma Kavori from UCLan is offering to send you a copy of the Lancashire Productivity Gap Report, which I think you should definitely do, Dharma, and can you send it on as well? That would be great. Could we have our next question from Stephen Greenhouse from JJO, please?
Morning, everyone. I think the CPS report and through Jake's guidance of that makes some fantastic progress with regards to investment and obviously planning structure. But the other key to unlocking all this is infrastructure. I know that the Rosendale Business Leaders Group at our very first meeting talked about improving infrastructure, and I just wonder whether that's one of the things that the Northern Research Group will be tackling further down the line.
Thanks, Steve. I mean, absolutely, it was briefly touched on the CPS report about how we can start to release infrastructure, particularly saying that it probably isn't reasonable, given the current financial state of the country, to simply rely on the government to release infrastructure. We need to be seeking new and novel ways for that to be funded, whether through international investment or even things like a Northern Premium Bond, as it was described, but a Northern Infrastructure Bond administered by the government using private capital. Quite a lot of the response to that report is that they don't think that's realistic. Well, it absolutely is, because we only have to look down the M66, sadly not down our commuter rail link, which I think is what Stephen's getting at, from Rosendale, to see that in Manchester, a large portion of the foreign investment they brought in is building 6,500 affordable homes, or council homes, as we would historically call them. They won't be owned by the council, but they will be council houses. No one would really think that is something that could be done with private investment. Most people would believe if you're going to build subsidised housing in this country, that it has to be done by the government. We have proved in Greater Manchester that if you can package up at scale those sorts of transactions, that you can absolutely introduce both foreign and private investment, and for them still to be viable. So a big thing about infrastructure spend, both social and hard infrastructure, road, rail, etc., is that we cannot just simply look to government to do it. But I go back to that point that we need that pan-Lancashire package of products that can have investments at that scale. I absolutely welcome the government's commitment to digital infrastructure. I think that's probably now, as we've learned during this pandemic and chatting on the Zoom call that we're on now, is probably now almost more important than things like a rail link, because I think we've learned that many people don't have to go in the office to work productively. And in fact, there was a report out this morning saying that those working from home are actually putting longer office hours in than if they're working in the office, which is something I should give great heart to all the employers on this call who are wondering what their staff are up to at this very moment. But finally, the focus of the government does have to be on some transport infrastructure in the north of England. And my own personal view is the Levelling Up Fund and other funds should seek to unlock smaller schemes. It's all very well to talk about HS2 and Northern Powerhouse Rail. I mean, all of us will have to wait a decade or more to have the opportunity to travel on those sort of major infrastructure projects. But there is things we can do very quickly and at a smaller scale in East Lancashire that would improve all of our lives very quickly. And if I'm going to be parochial about it for the moment, I would of course, link the East Lancashire Rail Link, which is a project at scale, but not on the sort of Northern Powerhouse rail scale. But also small things like anyone who lives in Rosendale, I think there's a few of us on the call, improving that roundabout in the middle of Rawtenstall with a fire station on would improve everybody's ability to get to and from work, to and from Baker, to and from Manchester. So I think that in terms of levelling up, there should be a real focus on small schemes, and by that I mean in the tens of millions rather than in the billions, that can rapidly improve bottlenecks and infrastructure challenges that we have here today, not just on, are we going to knock 20 minutes off our journey in 15 years' time going to London? That isn't something that is going to improve business today. Hopefully it will in the long term, but we need to focus on our recovery now.
Absolutely, and you all know my thoughts in terms of we need the investment into the transport infrastructure projects, and we need absolutely cast iron guarantees that that investment will go into our local manufacturers to help build those projects. We're fast running out of time, of course. I've got questions from Neil Evans, Peter Catlow, Mark Williams, and also Warren Bennett. And I will try, how many questions can we do in 6 minutes? To Neil Evans next, who is our new leader at VICA.
Thanks, Miranda. Yeah, Jake, I'm really interested in the future development of cities, the whole, the changing environment, the retail environment, its accelerated decline, the question mark about the social element of cities, perhaps in the short and slightly medium term, and of course offices and the relevance of working there. So I'm interested if there are any discussions about how we believe cities will change and whether or not that lends itself to the desire of Lancashire to stand out more.
Well, I mean, there are always discussions on this in government. I think we're entering a period of real change and government is going to have to react. I don't think we know what that change will be at the moment, but government is clearly, governments don't lead people, they follow people to some extent, and we'll have to see what happens. But I do think for towns like Accrington, Rosendale, Burnley, towns in East Lancashire, people not having to get into Manchester every day, I do think the long-term effect will be that our areas become more prosperous. Because in truth, if you didn't have to commute into Manchester, which is a bit of a pain in the backside, frankly, on the M66, there could be no better place to live than Rosendale, because we've got outstanding schools and outstanding countryside and outstanding people, I might add. And you could say the same for every former mill town across East Lancashire, I'm sure. So I think that, I don't know, and you would know better than me, but I think the future of cities is a lot less certain than it has been for a generation. And also that may lead to growth and prosperity in our towns, which is certainly something I would welcome.
Thank you. I couldn't agree more. There's a very good report done by the Northern Powerhouse Partnership about the future of towns and the fact that that is where our manufacturing heritage is focused. Thank you. Next to Peter Catlow, please, from Businesswise.
Thank you very much. My question sort of is founded on the transport links issue, but I think is symptomatic of a wider problem. I went about 3 years ago to a Northern Powerhouse meeting in Manchester. Nothing too much sticks with me apart from one comment. I was talking about the traffic jam that occurs at the end of the M65 on a regular basis by Boundary Mill in Cone, and saying, rather than all this touching on Jake's point, rather than talking about all this fancy HS2 and HS3 and what have you stuff, can somebody please fix that problem for us? And why isn't it fixed? And the guy was there from, is it called Transport for the North? I'll probably get that right. And he was the finance director, I believe. And I said to him, why is nobody fixing the traffic jam at the end of the M65? And he said, because they don't care. And so my fundamental question for Jake is, how the hell do you make people care? I was born here, like most people on this call. I left here in 1972, came back in 1998, and not much had happened in the interim, apart from the traffic jam at the end of the M65, of course. So how on earth do you make people care in London about us up here in the frozen north?
Well, basically, number one, give them bloody hell, which is what the Northern Research Group is doing. Have high expectations of your members of Parliament, like Andy Stevenson, who I think is a minister in the Transport Department at the moment, and give him bloody hell. And if they don't affect change, fire us all. But more widely, I do think you're going to see a change of focus. So I spoke at the very beginning, I said there's a bit of a rigged system that stacks investment in favour of London. Some steps have been taken in government to reverse that. We need to see what happens with them, but we need to make sure that that isn't the end of the story. And in terms of infrastructure, I just wonder, I was in London, I went into number 10 to have a meeting with the Chief of Staff of the Prime Minister to discuss this report. I got off the train, I get the train from Stockport, I got off the train in Euston, and there were 5 people on the train. Now, of course, that isn't going to continue, but I sort of wonder whether we are going to see a permanent reduction in traffic numbers, a permanent reduction in commuting. And if that does happen, it would be a time to review things like HS2, which I personally am in favour of, but if the world changes, we need to be prepared to say we need to review that decision and to focus more, and at the same time, and they not mutually exclusive, to focus on local connectivity. But I say this from my point of view, sat in my house here in Helmshire, the thing I would really value is fibre to the premises. And if we're going to move to a work from home model in the United Kingdom, we don't just have to prioritise the M65, which, by the way, should go all the way to Yorkshire. I think we all would accept that, but we also really have to have a big focus on digital infrastructure.
But Jake, if you're going to, I mean, we've talked a lot about manufacturing here in the Northwest as being, the way forward for us, and we've got a very strong manufacturing base. You can't manufacture stuff from via a cable. You've got to be there to make it.
No, you can't. But the point is, if you get lawyers and accountants and people who work in the service industry off the road every morning, then people who are going to work in a mill or products going to market can actually keep moving, reduce pollution, and increase productivity.
Thank you very much. I'm just going to try and encapsulate some of the in my closing comments, the questions that we haven't been able to raise. Important points from Mark Williams from Western Union about how do we unlock the potential for our local authorities to borrow to create financial gain to the local areas as they used to be able to, and also from Warren Bennett. Sorry, I've misrepresented Mark there. Because Warren Bennett's question was about from James's Places was about how do we unlock the ability for councils to borrow to really invest in the local area and the local towns and high streets, and from Mark Williams about further about the levelling up agenda and how we really get that investment coming to our local area. Can I please offer, Jake, that if you would like any business arguments or any case studies or any comment or support from any of our Diamond Ambassadors or our other members or local companies behind any of your Northern Research Group arguments, please ask, because we are there to support you. And hopefully that was also the same kind of call that Tony Grimshaw was giving to Sky News about leading the investment into the area to help business succeed. So lastly, just to say thank you very much, Jake, for coming.
Thank you for having me.
I apologise that this feels like three-dimensional chess with electric cattle prods when you're being thrown so many different questions on so many topics. But thank you very much for being here. Do you want to say anything to just finish?
Well, I suppose I just finish by saying this. I mean, if you want to, if you think some of the ideas we're starting to come forward with are of moderate interest. And, frankly, politicians writing ideas that are going to help businesses are never as good as businesses writing ideas that help your business, because actually know what you're talking about. We did widely talk to the business community, both locally and nationally, and also internationally. We're doing a series of reports. If you like what you see, good. If you think there's gaping holes and things that we need to address, there is an opportunity for us to remedy that. Miranda has my contact details, but if you type Jake Berry into Google, I'm the first hit. The next one is a failed country and western star in North America, but I am the first one. Send them to me. We are here to represent you and work for you, and unless we know what you're calling for, then we can't put that into government for you. So please keep the good ideas coming.
Thank you very much. We will continue throughout 2021 and beyond to try and get those views together and help magnify them and aim them towards you, Jake, and to the rest of government. Thank you very much, everyone, for being here, for Jake, for all of our companies. Sorry to those whose questions didn't get asked, and we'll try and do it again soon. Thank you, everybody.
Thank you. Thanks for watching this Chamber Live video from the East Lancashire Chamber of Commerce. If you've enjoyed this content, then you might enjoy some of the other content that's on the screen now. Please do subscribe to our YouTube channel.